pipeline monitor showed a hydrogen sulphide spike at 6:47 in the morning, and by noon the whole crew was on a bus back to Edmonton. 4 days ahead of rotation, I should have been relieved. Instead, I sat in the back of that bus, watching the boreal scrub flatten out into prairie, and I kept thinking about how my daughter hadn't picked up the phone in 2 weeks. She was 10. She didn't have her own phone, so I'd been calling my wife's number. My wife always answered, always said the same things. She's having a wonderful time. She's making friends. The program is so structured, it's exactly what she needs. Don't worry so much, you're going to embarrass her. I'd been on the pipeline corridor northwest of Fort McMurray for 7 weeks. 7 weeks of 12-hour days, and bunkhouse nights and satellite calls that cut out whenever the weather shifted. The calls with my daughter had stopped after the first week. My wife said the program discouraged outside contact during the bonding phase. I hadn't questioned it. That was the thing I kept coming back to on that bus ride. I hadn't questioned it. The Edmonton flight landed at 3 in the afternoon. I drove the 4 hours to Kingston, instead of sleeping like I probably should have. Pulled into our driveway just after 7 in the evening. The house sat there in the late summer light, looking exactly like it always did, and nothing like it should have. The lights were off. My wife's car wasn't in the driveway, but I'd known she was in Toronto that week for work, so that part made sense. What didn't make sense was the inside. I found my daughter's room first, like I always do when I come home. She was 10 years old and a chaos engine. Paint stained everything, pencil sketches taped to the walls, her stuffed fox on the floor because she kicked it out of bed in the night. That was my daughter's room on every normal day. The stuffed fox was on the pillow, precisely centered. Her art supplies were in a plastic bin, organized by color. Her sketchbook wasn't anywhere. The room smelled faintly of something sharp, like cleaning solution, and the carpet had vacuum lines in it. My throat did something strange. I stood in the doorway for a minute, just looking at that perfect room, and then I called my wife. She answered on the second ring. "You're not supposed to be home yet." "H2S alarm, whole site evacuated. Where's Willa?" "She's at the program, Meadowbrook. I told you about it." I didn't remember her telling me about anything called Meadowbrook. I remembered her mentioning a summer enrichment program, something through the church she'd started attending after we got married. I'd been distracted by the job prep. I'd nodded and signed something she put in front of me without reading it properly. What kind of program? Where? It's a faith-based youth enrichment program. Rural, near Flesherton. She's learning agriculture, community values, self-reliance. A pause. She was struggling. You know that. Since her mother died, she's been grieving. She's 10. My voice came out harder than I expected. Give me the address. Don't go out there and make a scene. These programs don't allow parent visits during the residency period. She signed a commitment. She's 10. She doesn't sign commitments. Give me the address. Flesherton was 93 kilometers north of Owen Sound on the map. I drove it in just under an hour and a half, following the GPS out of the town core onto county roads that went from paved to gravel to something barely better than a dirt track. The fields out there were enormous and quiet under the August evening sky. Hay bales, fence lines, the occasional farmhouse with the lights on. Meadowbrook Youth Fellowship was marked with a white wooden sign at the end of a long laneway. The property was an old farm operation, original stone farmhouse, a newer pole barn added at the back, and a low outbuilding I couldn't place at first. Everything painted white. A vegetable garden ran along the south side. A swing set stood in the yard with no children on it. The main building was locked. I tried the side entrance of the barn, also locked. The outbuilding too. Then I heard it. Singing. Children's voices, flat and tired, coming from somewhere past the tree line behind the property. I followed the sound through a gap in the fence, past the pole barn and around a hedgerow, and then the field opened up in front of me. Strawberry rows. Long ones, running east to west as far as I could see, and children moving through them, bent over the plants with harvest bags strung over their shoulders. I counted 17, 18, maybe 20 of them. The ages looked to range from maybe 8 to 14, all of them wearing long sleeves despite the heat, wide-brimmed hats, moving slowly, methodically. A man in a collared shirt stood at the edge of the field with a clipboard. My daughter was in the 4th row from the left. I knew her by the way she tilted her head when she was concentrating. Her mother used to tilt her head the same way when she was reading. Even from 40 meters I knew that posture, and that tilt, and every cell in my body went cold. I walked into the field. "Excuse me." The man with the clipboard stepped toward me. "This is private property. The program doesn't allow." "That's my daughter." She heard my voice. She turned around. I'm not going to be able to describe her face properly. I've tried in the years since, and I always fall short. Sunburned across the nose and cheeks, lips cracked and dry, hands raw and reddish from the strawberry plants. She looked smaller than I remembered. She'd only been gone 7 weeks, but she looked smaller. She said, "Dad?" And then she sat down in the dirt between the rows and started sobbing. I ran. The man with the clipboard put himself between us. I moved him with my forearm in a way I'm not particularly proud of, but don't regret either. 7 weeks of hauling pressure monitoring equipment across pipeline corridors had made me a lot harder to stop than I'd been a year before. My daughter threw herself at me the way she used to when she was 5. Arms around my neck, I lifted her like she weighed nothing, which she nearly did. "Daddy, Daddy, you came." She was shaking. Her whole body was shaking. "They said you gave me away. They said you paid them to take me because you didn't want me anymore, and Mum was gone and I was too much trouble." I held on. I didn't trust myself to speak. "I tried to be good. I tried so hard to be good so they'd call you and tell you I was ready to come home. They said if I worked hard enough you'd come get me." The other children had stopped picking. They were all watching us. Some of them looked hopeful. Some of them looked like they'd forgotten what hope was for. A boy near the middle of the rows, small, maybe 8 years old, looked at me and said quietly, "Is anyone coming for us too?" That question has never left me. The man with the clipboard had a radio. He was using it now, talking quietly into it, not taking his eyes off me. I shifted my daughter to my left side and started walking back toward the farmhouse. Reverend Norris came around the corner of the pole barn before I reached the gate. He was in his late 50s, well-pressed slacks, a pale blue dress shirt with Meadowbrook Youth Fellowship embroidered on the chest pocket. He had the kind of face that was built for reassurance, calm eyes, a measured smile, a voice that started very low and warm. "We've been expecting you might come by." He spread his hands slightly. "Your wife called ahead. I know this looks alarming, but the children are learning. My daughter is going to need a hospital." I kept walking. "She's not entirely in your care while she's in our program's custody. The residency agreement your wife signed transferred temporary guardianship to the fellowship for the duration of the summer." I stopped. He smiled. He actually smiled. I know that's hard to hear. "But the agreement is legally valid. I have the paperwork in my office. Your wife had proper authority as your spouse to. Show me where they sleep." "I'm afraid I can't allow that. The children's evening routine." "Show me where my daughter has been sleeping for 7 weeks. Or I start calling every number I have in my phone, starting with the OPP." The smile didn't change exactly, but something behind his eyes did. He nodded to someone behind me. I don't know which staff member it was. I know someone grabbed my arm and someone else went for my daughter, and she screamed, and what happened in the next 40 seconds is a sequence of physical decisions that came from somewhere below conscious thought. Pipeline work is not gentle. I was not gentle. My daughter stayed in my arms. I kept moving toward the laneway. 3 staff members and Reverend Norris between me and my truck, and then the blue and red lights came up the laneway through the dust, and everyone stopped. The OPP constable who got out was maybe 30, with the kind of careful, professional face that gave nothing away. He looked at the scene, me holding my daughter, 4 men standing in a loose half-circle, Reverend Norris with his phone out. "Somebody want to explain what's going on." Reverend Norris stepped forward immediately. "Constable Ferris, thank goodness you're here. This man assaulted 3 of my staff members and is attempting to abduct a child under our legal guardianship. I have the whole thing on video." "She's my daughter." I turned so the constable could see her face. Her cracked lips, the raw skin on her hands. "Look at her. She's been here 7 weeks. Look at those kids in the field behind the building." Constable Ferris looked. He went very still for a moment. "Sir," he said to Reverend Norris, "I'd like to see the inside of the building." "You'll need a warrant to." I've got grounds for a welfare check standing right here in this man's arms. I'm asking nicely, once. What followed was 4 hours that I spent mostly in my truck with my daughter, wrapped in a blanket from the cruiser's emergency kit, while 3 more OPP vehicles arrived, then a Children's Aid Society duty worker from Owen Sound, then a second KS worker, then a child health nurse from the county. They found 23 children on the property. The pole barn had been converted into a dormitory. 2 tiered cots, 1 toilet facility for 12 children, no shower access. The records showed wake time at 5:30 a.m., lights out at 9:30 p.m. 4.5 hours in the field every day, 2 hours of what Reverend Norris's program materials called moral instruction, 2 more hours of maintenance and cleaning work. The strawberries were being sold to a regional grocery distributor. The program's promotional materials described Meadowbrook as a summer of hands-on learning and spiritual formation. The participating families had each paid $3,000 for the privilege. The medical assessment that night: dehydration, early signs of malnutrition, 2 infected cuts on her right hand from the strawberry plants that hadn't been treated, significant sun damage on her face and forearms. The nurse said nothing was permanent. She said that carefully, more than once, like she understood how much weight that word was carrying. "I want to stay with my dad," my daughter said when they tried to take her to the assessment room. First words she'd spoken in 2 hours. "I'll be right outside the door," I told her. "I'm not going anywhere." She made me prove it by keeping the door open the whole time. My wife showed up at the OPP detachment in Owen Sound at around 10:30 that night. She'd driven up from Toronto. She looked pale and frightened, and I think genuinely shocked, and for about an hour I tried to hold on to the possibility that she hadn't understood what she was sending Willa into. That possibility didn't survive the interview. The OPP and CAS worker talked to her for a long time. I wasn't in the room, but the duty officer told me afterward what came out. She had been to Meadowbrook 3 times before our daughter arrived. She'd spoken to Reverend Norris extensively. She'd seen the dormitory barn. She'd met children who'd been there for 6 weeks already. She had recruited 2 other families from the church, sent them Reverend Norris's brochure, told them it was the best thing she'd ever done for a struggling child. The thing that came out in her statement, the thing that explained without excusing, was that she'd been in a program like this when she was 12. Her own parents, overwhelmed and guided by a church elder, had sent her to a farm-based character development camp in rural Manitoba for a summer. She'd worked fields. She'd slept in a barn. She'd been told that difficulty was discipline, and discipline was love. She'd come out of it believing that was true. She genuinely thought she was helping. It didn't make what she'd done right. It made it make a horrible, heartbreaking kind of sense. She was charged with failing to provide the necessaries of life and contributing to the exploitation of a minor. The recruitment of other families added additional counts. I haven't spoken to her since that night. Reverend Norris was arrested in his office at 11 p.m. The charges included labor exploitation of minors, failure to provide necessaries of life, fraud, and breach of trust. When the handcuffs went on, he began talking about religious freedom and state persecution and how those children needed him. He was still talking about it when they put him in the cruiser. 8 of his staff members were arrested over the following week. The program had been operating for 4 years across 2 locations in Ontario. 41 children in total had passed through Meadowbrook. The strawberry revenue went into an operating account under Reverend Norris's personal control. The families had paid $3,000 each. None of the children had ever seen a cent. In the end, Reverend Norris received 14 years in federal prison. His staff received sentences ranging from 18 months to 6 years. My wife received 3 years. The other families whose children had been at Meadowbrook drove out that night when the calls started going around. I stood in the OPP parking lot at 2 in the morning and watched parents arrive and find their children and break apart in ways that I recognized from the inside. The boy who'd asked if anyone was coming for him, his name was Oscar. His mother drove 4 hours from Sudbury. When she got out of the car, he ran across the parking lot to her, and neither of them said anything for a long time. My daughter and I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Kingston. I took a job with a utilities company doing pipeline integrity work close to home, a significant pay cut from the Fort McMurray corridor work, a pay cut I would make 100 times over. She started therapy in September, twice a week, a counselor she chose herself from a list of 3. She slept with the lamp on. She had nightmares that woke her up calling for me, and I'd go sit on the end of her bed until she went back to sleep. For almost 3 months, she didn't draw. Her sketchbook sat on her desk. The pencils and the watercolor set her grandparents had given her for Christmas. She wouldn't touch them, told me once, flatly, that drawing was wasting time when she should be working. Told me Reverend Norris had made them hand over any personal items when they arrived. Told them creative pursuits were a form of vanity, and vanity was a sin. I called her therapist after that conversation. Her therapist said it was a normal response to that kind of conditioning, and that we needed to wait. So we waited. The morning I found her at the kitchen table with a pencil in her hand. I stopped in the doorway and didn't say anything. She was drawing our old house, the one in Napanee, where the 3 of us had lived before her mother got sick. The house with the big maple in the front yard. She looked up and saw me watching. I just wanted to see if I still could, she said. She could. The trial ran for 7 months. I attended most of the days I was able to. My daughter didn't attend any of them, on the advice of her therapist. She knew the outcomes. I told her the day after each significant development, plainly and without embellishment. I think she deserved to know what happened to the people, who had taken her summer, and tried to take more than that. When the verdicts came in, she asked if she could call Oscar. He lived in Sudbury now with his mother, and the 2 families had stayed loosely in touch since that night in the parking lot. She and Oscar talked on the phone for 45 minutes. I could hear him laughing at something, she said, and that was one of the better sounds of that whole year. 2 years after the trial ended, a community arts organization in Kingston put together an event for survivors of institutional abuse. They asked my daughter, through her therapist, if she'd like to submit work. She spent 3 months preparing. I found her at the kitchen table, at 11 at night sometimes, working by the lamp, the watercolor set open. She wouldn't show me the pieces while she was working on them. Said she needed them to be done first. The show opened on a Saturday afternoon at a gallery space off Princess Street. I drove her there. She was quiet most of the way, looking out the passenger window at the October trees. "Are you nervous?" I asked. "A little." She picked at the edge of her thumbnail. "What if no one gets them?" "Then you explain. You're good at explaining." She considered this. "Okay." There were 9 other artists, all of them survivors of various programs and institutions, ages ranging from 12 to 60. My daughter's pieces hung on the west wall. 6 paintings in watercolor and ink, framed in plain oak that she'd helped sand herself. They were all of fields, but not the way the field at Meadowbrook had been. These fields had wildflowers growing through the crop rows, goldenrod and chicory and Queen Anne's lace coming up between the strawberry plants. In each successive painting the flowers grew taller, and the rows became less defined, until in the final piece the rows had disappeared almost entirely, and the whole canvas was wild and bright and full of color. One of them had a small figure in the middle distance, standing in the field with their arms at their sides and their face turned up. You couldn't tell if the figure was trapped or standing still by choice. She had titled it, "Getting My Bearings." I overheard her explaining, that one to an older woman near the end of the afternoon. "I don't want them to be just sad," my daughter said, "because they're not anymore. But I also didn't want to pretend the field isn't still there." The woman started crying quietly. My daughter handed her a tissue from her jacket pocket, like she'd been prepared for this, which I think she had been. Constable Ferris came for an hour in the afternoon. He stood in front of the paintings for a long time, and then came over to where I was standing. "She's something," he said. "Yeah." That night, when I looked at her, he stopped. "I've been doing this job for 8 years. I just knew. I knew I wasn't leaving that property without going inside." "I know. I saw it." He nodded. We stood there together for a while without saying anything else. Sometimes that's enough. 3 years later, my daughter was 13 and lobbying me hard for a dog. A real dog, she clarified, not a goldfish. She'd said this several times as if she suspected I might suggest a goldfish. I'd started volunteering with a nonprofit that educated parents about exploitation warning signs. We did sessions at community centers, at libraries, at school board events across eastern Ontario. We taught parents to ask specific questions before sending their children anywhere. Is there unrestricted phone access? Can you visit at any time, without notice? What are the sleeping arrangements? Are children ever required to perform work for the organization? We taught them that legitimate programs do not require guardianship transfers, that isolation from family contact is not a program feature. It is a warning sign, that no summer program fee should come with paperwork that involves legal custody of your child. We shared my daughter's story with her permission. She'd written it down herself at 13 handwritten pages, and she'd given me a copy and said I could use it if it helped. Her therapist said the writing had been one of the more important steps. The last paragraph said, I thought my dad left me there on purpose because I was too sad and too much trouble after Mum died, but he came the first day he could. He came the very first day he was able to get home. That's what I kept going back to when it gets hard. Not all the terrible stuff, just that. He came the first day he could. I have read that paragraph more times than I can count. We drove out to Flesherton on a weekend in October, 3 years after. My daughter had asked to go. I wasn't sure it was a good idea, and her therapist said to follow her lead. The property on the county road had changed hands after the asset seizure. The farmhouse was being renovated, scaffolding up one side. The pole barn was gone. The outbuilding where the locked reflection room had been, the room she told me she'd been put in twice for asking about me, was also gone. The field was different. Someone had let it go wild. The strawberry rows had been torn up, and whatever had grown in since was a mix of tall grass and late-season wildflowers. Goldenrod still holding yellow past the first frost. Queen Anne's lace gone to seed. The whole thing looked like it was, in the process of becoming something else, which I suppose it was. My daughter stood at the fence line for a while looking at it. It's better, she said. Yeah. She'd brought her sketchbook. I watched her make quick lines of the field and the fence and the goldenrod. She worked fast now, with a confidence she'd had to rebuild from nothing, a confidence that looked different from the one she'd had before, because it had been earned in a harder way. Oscar texted me this morning, she said, without looking up from the page. He's helping run an art therapy workshop in February for kids who've been through institutional care. He wants to know if I'll come talk to the group. Do you want to? Yeah. She added a shadow along the fence line. I think it would help them to know it's possible, to get to the other side of it. I watched her draw. The field looked nothing like it had. On the evening I'd walked through the gap in the hedgerow and found her in the 4th row from the left. But I would never stop seeing it. The long rows and the bent figures and the August heat and my daughter's head tilted the same way her mother's used to tilt, and the moment she heard my voice and turned around. I'd gotten lucky. A hydrogen sulphide alarm at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning. A safety protocol that sent a whole crew home 4 days early. 4 days I hadn't been supposed to have. Not every parent gets those 4 days. I'd been thinking about that for 3 years, and I'd been trying to do something with it. Standing in front of groups of people and saying, ask the questions, trust the feeling that something is off. The voice that says, wait, let me see one more thing, let me ask one more question. That voice is worth listening to every single time. Because the alternative is hoping for a lucky alarm. And some parents never get one. My daughter finished the sketch and held it out to show me. She'd drawn the field with the goldenrod tall, and the crop rows almost invisible beneath the new growth. In the corner of the page, barely there, a small figure standing with their face turned up toward the sky. That's from Getting My Bearings, she said. I keep coming back to that image. I know, I like it. She closed the sketchbook and tucked it under her arm. Looked at the field one last time. Okay, she said, let's go home. We walked back to the truck. She climbed in and had the sketchbook open again before I'd started the engine, adding something in the margin she'd just thought of. I watched her for a second through the windshield. My daughter, 13 years old, drawing in the margins of her own memories and turning them into something she got to keep. That is the only ending worth telling, not the sentence lengths or the case file numbers. The ending is this. Some mornings I wake up to the sound of her playing music in the kitchen, and I lie there in the dark listening to it, and that sound is the whole world.